does Centerville Schools, do you guys have a bullying policy in place?
Yes, we do. We actually have a bullying policy, and then we actually have another policy that speaks to anti-harassment, and it's a little bit more broader in scope. So yes, we do.
What are the differences? I know we talked a little bit about that last time.
Really, they're pretty close. The bullying one, though, is specific to the act of bullying, kind of talks specifically about defining bullying, the fact that it's repeated and constant abuse of another individual. Also includes the fact that bullying can be physical, emotional, mental, psychological. The anti-harassment is really broader in nature and takes into account kind of the abuse, the bullying, the persecution of people because of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, those kinds of things.
And how long have those policies been in place?
Those have been in place a long time. We actually work with a company that helps us keep all of our board policies up to date, and so I meet with those representatives about 4 or 5 times a year as the laws change or the high-rise code changes, and so those are always updated based on the code and the new law and legal requirements. So we've had a policy in place for as long as I can remember. I've been in the district over 26 years, so a long time.
Why do you think it's important to have a bullying policy or even anti-harassment policy in place?
Well, I think in school, as school administrators and as staff, it's important for us to make sure that all staff and students come to school and have a safe environment to learn and to teach. And so that's, again, keeping students safe, staff safe, making sure our buildings are safe. That's our #1 priority. And so that just extends to covering all of the different groups of students and staff that we have in our building and in our school district. So it's incumbent of us to make sure that everybody feels good, enjoys coming to school, has a great environment to learn in, and a safe environment to learn in.
When you have somebody who approaches you about the possibility of somebody bullying somebody else or the possibility of them being bullied, what are the steps that you and the staff take?
Okay, well, you know, typically when something is reported, it gets reported to our building administrators. So typically that's the principal. Sometimes the information would go to a guidance counselor, but eventually the whole investigation is turned over to a building level administrator or principal. And then that principal will take time and spend time investigating the situation. Obviously they'll talk to the individual who is claiming that they're being bullied, then they'll follow up any leads that they may feel like they need to do a proper and full investigation. So that means investigating, talking to other students that may be involved on the peripheral edges, or students that may have knowledge of some things that are shared in the investigation or the report, and then they just follow up that way.
And then what are some of the punishments that students can face? Obviously, it's going to be a wide range.
Correct. Yeah, there is a wide range of consequences, and like any range of consequences, the goal is modifying or changing the behavior of the person who is acting inappropriately. And in some cases, in minor cases, that's a matter of simply talking to the student involved, talking to their parents, coming to an agreement that this is going to stop. And if it stops at that lowest level, then that's good and that's fine. But all the way up to, obviously, other things that schools use, like detentions, or Saturday schools, out-of-school suspensions, even at its furthest part, expulsions if necessary and needed and warranted.
Talk a little bit about, you guys do have a proactive approach to anti-bullying. Talk about what you guys do as a district, your teachers do in the schools, that type of stuff.
Sure, and appreciate that opportunity. I think when you talk about anti-harassment or bullying, it's so important to try to work hard to create a a positive environment, a positive culture, a culture that's collaborative, and just a nice place for kids to come to school and learn. So depending on the grade level, we have a lot of initiatives going on in our school buildings. At our lower levels, like our K-1 buildings, our 2 through 5 buildings, you'll see a lot of things like posters that are hanging on the wall. We actually have buildings that have named the hallways in their buildings, like Citizenship Lane, Respect Lane, Responsibility Lane, Respect Street, those kinds of things. A lot of our buildings actually just finished a really neat initiative last week where it was all about kindness. And they were actually logging acts of kindness that the students would do in their buildings with their peers, and writing those out. In fact, it was really neat because as superintendent, I received in our interschool mail probably about 50 letters from elementary students where they were saying to me, thanking me for the job that I do, thanking me for calling snow days, thanking me for doing everything that I do to make Centerville schools. So I actually went over to those buildings and went into those classrooms and thanked the teacher and those students for that. But we have one of our K-1 buildings, for example, was named a National School of Character. Because of their efforts of being proactive. So you'll find that K through 12 where our buildings work hard to talk about making good decisions, doing what's right, treating others with respect, and then we kind of talk that language. And at their lower grades, the students will learn those terms like responsibility and respect, good conduct, making good decisions, and then we all talk the same language, so it's reinforced daily and throughout the school year.
I kind of want to ask you, and this is just I would just want you to reiterate something. Does Centerville City Schools tolerate bullying in any way, shape, or form?
We have a zero policy on bullying and other types of inappropriate behavior, but we don't have what we refer to as mandatory consequences. So we do believe that it's important and it's prudent of us to get involved in those situations, review the circumstances, look at all the pieces of evidence surrounding the situation, and then make the best decision as far as vetting consequences based on the situation that occurs.
And do you mind, I did talk to Miss Place,
yes.
Because she teaches a class in high school, and
Right.
it's kind of, she teaches a little bit about sexting and how, and we were doing a story about how that can become bullying.
Sure.
Could I get your comment on having that taught in the school and what you think it kind of makes it, like, does it make a difference? Because I don't think teenagers really realize when they're doing that, what can actually happen.
Sure.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mrs. Place does an amazing job, and she's been teaching that for a while, and we've had some parent meetings that have been very well received. But it's so interesting how things evolve and how things change over the years, and with social media and smartphones and texting and Instagram and all the other things that are out there that our youth are using nowadays. I think you're right. I think many times students don't take time to really think about the implications, the seriousness of things that they do. So if they say something, they post something, they write something, it can come back at them and be very, very serious. In fact, it's been a while since I've been a building principal, but I used to always tell the students as a building principal that they have to understand that they're responsible for what they do, what they say, what they write, whether or not that's in an electronic format or a pencil paper format, which nobody uses much anymore. But you're right, it's opened up a whole new mode of medium that students use now and use all the time, and it's just they need to understand how serious that is. So the nice thing in our school district, like most school districts, we have school resource officers, and part of what they do is they do attend in classes, and they do go into health classes, for example, and they do talk about those things where appropriate and where it fits the curriculum to reinforce with students. Again, to make good decisions, and that students can get involved in very serious situations where they just aren't thinking and they're making poor choices. I use an example a lot of times that, years and years ago, you might have had students out on a playground where they'd be chasing each other and they'd be saying, "I'm going to kill you." Well, and that was just kind of pretty dismissed, and that was just kids being kids and chasing after each other. And now those are all considered threats and dealt with very seriously.
So you've kind of seen things evolve over the years and in your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, how do you personally feel about that? Like you said, when I was growing up, we could say stuff like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I joke around all the time with the photographers that I work with,
Right.
and you know what I mean? And,
Sure.
and it's not taken seriously, but now as a district you have to.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's a good question. Our world is such that when we talk about safety of our staff and students is our first priority, our number one priority, you have to take everything very seriously. So, if you see something written on the bathroom wall that is disturbing, you can't just clean it off, and you have to investigate it. You have to check into it. Words that used to just be words and kind of written off as being, oh, they're not really serious, or they would never do those kinds of things. Now we go to the nth degree to check into things and check everything out, because you can't leave any stone unturned when you're talking about school safety. So you're right, it's a lot different. And it's hard sometimes too, because in that electronic format, freedom of speech, cell phones, private property, all those things have complicated all of our lives as far as how we can investigate, when we can investigate, what we can look at. But again, we're fortunate that we have such a great relationship with Centerville Police and the Washington Township Sheriff's Office that we work with them, we talk with them, they help us in those situations, and we work collaboratively together. So.
What about cyberbullying? I've been asking, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
ask you this last time because
Right.
it simply slipped my mind, but I asked the last two districts that I spoke to, at what point do you feel that the district steps in and the parents take over, or vice versa, when it comes to cyberbullying? Because it doesn't always happen in school,
Correct.
per se.
Yeah, and that's a really good question too. And I think when it comes into school and is affecting the school and the school environment is really when we get involved. I mean, obviously we're concerned about all of our kids, and we're concerned about them in our school building and outside of our school buildings. But sometimes there are some gray areas out there as to what we can deal with and what we can act on when it's not inside our school buildings. So, if things happen over the summer that involve like cyberbullying, we may not even be aware of it. But then say the school year starts back up and there's carryover, or there's an additional things that come up that we become aware of that we know or believe has maybe occurred while the students were inside our school buildings, then we're involved with that. So we may not know that situation that occurred in the summer just because we wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if there's a carryover and it comes in and affects our schools and disrupts our schools and the educational process, that's when we get involved.
And just my last question, how important is it for students, going back to the sexting thing,
Mm-hmm.
how important is it for them to have Miss Place teach them about this and inform them about it? How important do you think from a district perspective?
Oh, I think it's huge. Again, I think sometimes in today's world, again, if I go back to that example of being out on the playground and chasing after each other and making comments like, "We're going to kill you," that was nothing. That was dismissed, but it's no longer the case. And so sexting, transmitting inappropriate pictures, receiving inappropriate pictures, maybe not being involved, but just passing those along, all those things are just so serious now and carry, huge consequences, especially in the courts and also in school districts as well. So, the education of our students and making sure they understand that even if they're just passing along something that they received, or what they should do if they receive something that's inappropriate and those kinds of things. It's just, and the whole thing about smartphones and cell phones, everybody has them now, and I think sometimes everybody gets so used to using them and seeing things, and things get passed all the time that sometimes we forget that how serious things can be, our actions can be.